Welcome to this Scikit-Learn full-day tutorial. It's going to be 2 half-day tutorials, and we've somewhat tried to separate the topics, but there is a continuity between the two. So I'm Gaël Varoquaux, and this is Olivier Grisel here, and Jake Vanderplas here. So Olivier is right now an independent consultant, working pretty much on data mining, data processing in Python. Jake is a researcher in astronomy using machine learning for astronomy. And I work in neuroimaging, so brain imaging, and I use machine learning for brain imaging. So Scikit-Learn, if you don't know, is a Python project for machine learning. Some of the philosophy behind it is that we want it to be extremely general purpose. We don't want to have assumptions on how you're going to use it, and I think you can see it from the variety of topics that we're applying it to. We want the code to be very readable and very hackable. I think experience shows that a very generic machine learning algorithm is almost never the best solution to a given problem. So we think it's important for people to be able to untie bricks and tie them together for their own purposes. And we want it to be easy to use and easy to install. And these are restrictions on what we can do, but I'm personally very happy with them. So in terms of the tutorial, we've put up, so this is a Mac, and I don't use Macs, so it's going to make things harder for me, but that's a good thing. Okay. So we've put up a set of IPython notebooks on GitHub. If you go to GitHub and to Jake's account, so Jake VDP, and then there's a Scikit-Learn SciPy2013 repository. If you clone this, you have all the materials that you need for this tutorial. So I suggest you do this. So we're going to be running the tutorial on the IPython notebook. All right. So I guess everybody is aware, is happy using IPython, NumPy, SciPy, and Matplotlib, because this is what we're going to be using. And now I'm going to switch to the first notebook, so if you can follow along. So if you can open this notebook. Is everybody able to open the notebook? Yeah, thanks, Jake. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's right. All right, so it's already there. So you should have this notebook open, and we're going to go through it. All right, so what is machine learning? We can define it as a subset of artificial intelligence, but what it really is about devising algorithms, strategies to learn decision rules from data. Are you? Yeah, it's so. All right, so machine learning is about learning decision rules, and what's really important to keep in mind is that these decision rules should apply on unseen data, on new data, and we'll come back to this later. So just to give you an example, I'm going to run these cells, and you can do the same thing. So you need to do shift return to run them. So first I'm going to switch in inline mode for PyLab, which means I'm going to capture the figures in the notebook. And then I'm going to run this little example, and we're not showing you the code that generates it. It's going to be for later. I'm struggling with a Mac. And so what you can see here, I'm going to grab a laser pointer. Well, what you can see here is data points. There are two kinds of data points. There is a blue data point and a red data point. And the decision that we want to learn is how to separate the blue data points from the red data points. And we've learned a line, or hyperplane, that separates these two sets of data points. So that's one example of learning a decision rule from data. And the question is, okay, how can we do this in more complex settings? And you can see that there's a difference between separating data that you've already seen and separating data that you haven't seen. Because if new data comes in, well, you don't know exactly where it's going to come in. You're making hypotheses on where it's going to come in. To see the code, even though I said that we wouldn't go through it, you can use the %load magic, and it's there. But you'll understand it later. Okay, so that was a classification task. So separating apples from oranges. Now we can look at a regression task. A regression task can be seen as fitting a continuous model to data. Regression task has continuous data. Classification task has classes. All right, so we're going to be working with NumPy arrays. So just a quick example of a NumPy array. This is a random array, a 3x5 array. So I hope you're familiar with that. So the reason we're working with NumPy array is that they're compact in memory and they have efficient numerical operations. And you'll see that quite often when you apply machine learning to data, suppose it's text data, you don't have NumPy arrays. So then there's a challenge, okay, how do I go from this to NumPy arrays? And some communities don't use NumPy arrays because of this. And we feel it's just more efficient in terms of memory and speed. All right, so NumPy array is accessible like a list, but in any direction. So I can print the first element. I can print the first row or the first column using indexing. I can transpose it, so flip the two axes using .t. And something that's important, especially if you come from MATLAB, is that if I have a row vector, it's a 1D vector. And transposing it will not make it a column vector. It will still be a 1D vector. So the way you do this is that you want to add an axis at the end. And you can do this by indexing it with a new axis construct, right? So this is how you go from a 1D vector to a column vector. Transposition will not work. Okay? Right, another kind of storage that we're going to be using are sparse matrices. So first we're going to create a dense array with a lot of zeros. So the way we do this is that we create a random array with entries that are between 0 and 1, and then we set many elements to 0. Okay, so now we have a dense array with many elements that are 0. This is costly. If we're not interested, well, if we've got many elements that are 0, we have a cost of storing them, even though they have pretty much no information. And this situation can happen if you're looking at counting statistics on, say, words. Well, in a given text, you're going to have a small number of words, even though in the whole English literature, you're going to have a very large number of words. So if you look at word frequency in a given text, you're going to have a lot of zeros. So you're going to have matrices that look like this. And we're going to store them and work with them using sparse matrices. So these are SciPy sparse matrices. There are different kind of storage for sparse matrices, and I won't go into them right now. But here's how you can build one kind of storage, which is a compressed sparse row matrix from a dense matrix. There are other ways of constructing sparse matrices. If you've got a huge number of zeros, it may not be the right way to build in a dense array and then sparsify it. Right? So you can see that it's harder to read because it's only listing the positions of the non-zeros. But it's more compact in memory. And we can convert it back to a dense array using the toArray method. And if the thing is really big, this is going to blow our memory. Okay, so to build it, another way of doing it is to use lil, which is list of lil, a list of list. So the way you can see it is you can see an array as a list of vectors, okay? While a sparse matrix can be seen as a list of lists in which you give each time the position of the non-zeros only, right? You're not giving full vectors. And so here we're creating an empty list of lists. Okay, so the interesting thing about the lil storage is that it's a storage in which it's not very costly to add and remove non-zero elements. In most sparse arrays, it is fairly costly because you've got some underlying arrays, so basically a C arrays, in which you cannot insert or append elements easily. In a list, you can do this. So when you have a list of lists, you can very easily add and remove elements. Now the problem is you've got an overcost of a chained list, which is more costly than an array. So list of lists, lil, is really good for creating arrays, for creating sparse matrices, but once you have created it, you probably want to move over to something else. So here we are creating a lil matrix by adding non-zero elements. And we get this, and we can look at it in a dense array way, or look at it, or convert it to CSR, which is going to be a more compact representation. Right? It does depend on the algorithm. I think CSR is a safe bet in general, but it does depend on the algorithm, and it's a general fact. It really depends on your access pattern, and your access pattern depends on the algorithm. It is, though I believe, always mentioned in the notes of the algorithm. Okay, so there's a bunch of sparse formats over which I will not go, and the SciPy sparse module gives everything you need to deal with this. Okay, Matplotlib, in my opinion, you cannot process data without looking at it, or well, you can, but you're going to get interesting results. So we're going to be using Matplotlib, and in the IPython notebook, we're going to be using the inline mode just to have the figures that are embedded in Matplotlib. Okay, so one way to import it. So percent pylab inline does imports magically, but I think none of us really like this because you don't see the imports reading the notebook. So we always import things explicitly. So here we're importing pyplot from Matplotlib. And then we can use it as just a simple plotting tool and to plot sine of x as a function of x. This is how we do it. All right? So that's line plots. If we're going to want to do scatter plots, we're going to use the scatter command. And we're going to be doing a lot of these because this is quite often how we look at our data points in 2D in Scikit-Learn. Okay? We can show images. So basically a dense 2D regular grid of data. So here we've created an image that's sine in one direction, cosine in the other. Well, an image, a 2D array. So the way you can see it is that we first created what we call an in-space, which is a continuous array that goes from 1 to 12 with 100 points. Then, so that's x. Then we've created another one, which is the same thing, but the other way around. We've taken the sine of x, the cosine of y, and multiplied them, okay? And with broadcasting, they just fill in. So we can look at what it looks like. And this is what it looks like. Right, and I forgot that we had also multiplied by y. So this is the gradient. Okay, does that make sense? So this is basic array manipulation and visualization. And one last thing we can do with this data is to contour it, so plot its contours, which you can do using the contour command. And there you go. We can do a bit of 3D using, so to do 3D, we have to import from another namespace, which is MPL toolkits, so Matplotlib toolkits, dot mplot3d. So this is how we're going to do 3D. And once, so importing this actually does a bit of magic and changes the way the axes command works. So this is why you need to do this import, even though we're not using this object afterwards. Okay? So once we've imported this, we can create axes that have a 3D projection. And we can do something like this. So this is a surface plot of our image that we had before. So I don't know if you all know the mesh grid command. It creates a 2D mesh of the position given. So two 2D meshes actually. Well, two 2D arrays. One which gives the x positions and one which gives the y positions of a grid. Okay? We're going to be using it later on. All right. And just to point out that this is only a minor fraction of what's in Matplotlib. If you don't know it, the example gallery is fantastic. You should really be looking at it. And you can always use the %load magic in IPython to load something from the example gallery. And just to do a demo, we've loaded something here. I'm not going to go over it. We can run it, and we get really cool ellipses. All right. So what's next? I believe it's you, Jake.
All right, so that was just an overview of some of the basic tools that we're going to be using throughout today. If some of those are unfamiliar to you, then maybe you can gain some familiarity today. But what we really want to focus on today is the machine learning aspect of, and the tutorial is going to kind of go over two different sides of things. We're going to look at the API for Scikit-Learn in particular, and we're also going to go over a lot of the basics of machine learning as a practice. So things that would apply not only to Scikit-Learn, but to any other machine learning packages you might use. So to start out on that track, I want to just do a quick overview of what a learning problem looks like in practice. So if you open this second Scikit-Learn overview notebook, this is just a quick example of what machine learning looks like in practice. Again, we'll start PyLab inline as we did before, just to get the plots. So the first part of learning is getting a data set. And all of these aspects, I'm just going to go over them quickly right now. We'll talk about them more in detail later, but just so you can see the overview. So we're going to load a digits data set. And what the digits data looks like is, again, it's a 2D array. If we look at the shape of this right here, we have 1,797 samples in 64 dimensions. And we have labels for these digits that are in the target array. If we look at the target shape, we can see that it's an array of 1,797 points. So those are the labels of our digits. And if we look at what the data is, the images are these 2 by 2 or these 8 by 8 two-dimensional arrays that represent an image. We'll see that a little further down. So learning and predicting, what we do is we, again, this is very quick and we'll go back through it, so don't worry if you're not following right now. We just want you to see the overview. We'll instantiate an estimator, and here we're going to use the support vector machine estimator. We pass it some hyperparameters when we instantiate the estimator. That says this is the kind of model we want to fit. And then we fit that to our data. We're going to fit to all the data but the last point. That's what this :-1 means. We'll fit the model to all data except that last point. And now based on that model that we've trained with the data, we're going to predict what the label is for this last data point. And the label says it's an 8. So sometimes we'd want to know how well we did on this, right? So we can, I'm going to skip down here, we can print what the true value is. The true value is an 8. So that's good, we're doing all right. And we'll talk later about how to quantitatively decide whether our model is doing a good job on our problem. And this is a way we can actually visualize this data. Since these are handwritten digits, what we're looking at is an 8 by 8 grid of pixels. And this is the digit that was classified as an 8. So, it sort of looks like an 8, right? I might call that a 6 by eye, but the data set says that right there is an 8. So our learner has actually done a good job of, just based on this quick support vector machine, a few lines of Python, we're able to recognize that this handwritten digit is an 8. So that's pretty impressive. I always think that's cool that 3 lines of Python and an import from Scikit-Learn, and all of a sudden you're recognizing handwritten digits. But we'll go into that example in a little more detail later. Another cool thing about Scikit-Learn is that once you've trained these models, you can actually save them, you can persist them until later. And the way we do that is through Python's pickle module. So here we're going to do a very similar thing. We'll import support vector machines. We'll load an iris data set. We'll get the data in the target, and we'll fit the model. So just doing the quick steps, same ones we saw above. And now let's say we want to save that model till later. We want to put it somewhere where we can get it back and fit and predict on some new data. We can import the pickle module and dump the model to a string and then reload it here. And we'll show that reloading the model, you can call predict and get back a prediction. And again, this prediction matches what the target value is. And just as a last note, within Scikit-Learn we have this utility called joblib, which actually works a little better than pickle in some cases. And the way that you would use joblib to store your model is to do something like this, joblib.dump. So anyway, this is just a broad overview, and I want you to see that basically what we're doing is we're defining an estimator, we're calling fit, and we're calling predict to learn on some new data. So these are the pieces that we'll be going into detail on over the next couple hours. Okay, any questions at this point? Yeah.
What does the SVM stand for?
Yeah, SVM stands for support vector machines, and that's a particular class of model that can be pretty powerful, and we'll see it in action a little bit more later. So, yeah.
Automatically the first field, or how does the target define
He was asking about target, if target's automatically the first field. So the data sets that we have built into Scikit-Learn, we'll see this again in a second, they store their data in a particular format, but that format doesn't really matter, and the name target and the name data doesn't really matter. All you really need is you need an array right here, a 2D array right here, and you need a 1D array right here. So if you have a 2D array and a 1D array, you can perform learning on them. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Anything else right now? All right, let's move on to look at some more data sets. we go back to our contents here, we have this 2.1 representation of data. We'll go to that notebook right now. How to what? Oh. Yeah, we forgot about a little piece. So later on, we're going to be using some slightly bigger data sets. So if you have a terminal open, let me try to make this a little bigger. How do I make that bigger? There we go. If you can go to a terminal, and I'm in this. I'm in just the main Scikit-Learn SciPy2013 folder. We have a script here that's called fetchData.py. And this is going, if you run this script, I'm worried that I'm going to tell everybody to run it right now and we're just going to kill the network. But if you run this script, it will fetch, I think it's a couple hundred megabytes worth of data that we're going to be using throughout the day. You might try running it right now, and if it seems like it's hanging up, which it might, we have a little USB stick that you can actually download these data sets on. And are the data sets just in a folder on here?
There is a zip file called datasets.
Okay, there's a zip file called datasets on this. And I'm going to go ahead and pass this around so that people can start doing that. We won't be using these particular data sets until a little bit later in the tutorial. But it'd be good to start getting the downloads and getting the copying going now. Okay. And if you have questions on that, maybe get Olivier's attention, and he'll help you out as we're going through the rest of this section. So back over to the notebook. We're going to look at representation and visualization of data. So we saw a second ago that the data is in 2D arrays for the features and 1D arrays for the labels. And in this section, we want to go into a little more detail about that. So by the time we get to the end of this section, I want to make sure that you guys know the internal data representation that Scikit-Learn uses. I want you to know how to use this, the dataset loaders to load some example data to play around with. And know how to do some things that we call vectorization, turning image and text data into data that can be used within Scikit-Learn. Feature extraction is another name for that. And also, this is a little old. We talked about Matplotlib before, but we're going to be able to visualize some of that data. So, as I said before, data in Scikit-Learn is two-dimensional arrays, and the arrays that you're looking at are their shape is the number of samples by the number of features. So the number of samples might be number of samples represent the distinct objects you're looking at. So let's say you're trying to classify a bunch of handwritten digits. If you have 256 digits that you're looking at, those are the samples, 256. The number of features are the number of attributes that you have that you've measured for each of those samples. So in the case of the digits, we have an 8x8 pixel grid, so that's 64 features, right? And in the case of other data sets, we're going to look at flowers, the iris data set before. We have a set of a few measurements of the leaf and flower sizes. So those are the number of samples. So keep that in mind. Whenever you want to do a learning problem, you have to think about what are my samples, what are the objects that I'm interested in, and what are the features? What are the measurements that I have for each of those objects? And we'll arrange those in a two-dimensional grid. So as an example, we can pull in the iris data set. And this is kind of a classic data set used in machine learning. You'll come across it in a lot of places. And what we're looking at are different species of iris. So we have three different species, which if you run this code right here, it'll just display some images showing these species. We have the setosa at top, we have the versicolor, and we have the virginica at the bottom. So the task here is to write a machine learning algorithm that will recognize these irises, that will be able to classify them into their correct species based on some measurements. So a quick question in this case, what do you think when we look at the data, remember we need a 2D array of number of samples versus number of features. In this case, just as a quick review, what do the number of samples refer to? Sorry? So that's the number of classes, right? We have three different classes of irises.
How many different flowers are we measuring?
I heard right there, yeah. The number of different flowers is the number of samples. So that's a good point that you brought up. The number of classes is a distinct thing, and we could be performing learning on something with 20,000 different classes, or 3 different classes, or 2 different classes. And we still need a certain number of samples drawn from among those classes in order to do the learning problem. So we have n samples is the number of flowers we're looking at. What might be the number of features here? Does anyone have an idea? What features might you use to classify these irises? So that's a good point. We could use pixels, right? We could use the brightness and the color value of each pixel in this image. So that would be an image processing task. It would be a little bit more difficult. Yeah, so you looked forward, didn't you? So what we're actually going to do here is a little bit easier. We have a database of measurements that were made in the field where someone measured the length of the petals, the width of the petals, the length of the sepals, the width of the sepals. And so if you scroll down, like I'm sure this guy did right there, you'll see that our features are the sepal length, the sepal width, the petal length, and the petal width. So these are real numbered features. They're measurements in centimeters. And so what we have is the number of samples versus 4, the number of features. And that's our matrix of data. And the target classes are these 3 different classes that we're looking at. So to load the data, we import from the Scikit-Learn.datasets. Let me scroll all the way up. We import from the datasets submodule, and there are a lot of interesting datasets in here that we'll get to later. So we load the iris, and then the datasets return this thing called a bunch object. There's nothing special about a bunch object. It's basically like an enhanced dictionary. One of the confusions we often see on the mailing lists is people say, I have this data. How do I create a bunch object? Let me just say here, you don't need to create a bunch object. It's just how we encapsulate the data here. If you have your arrays, you're good to go. So to get at the arrays here, we can look at the keys within here. And the data is the number of samples by number of features array. The target is the labels, and then we have some other things in here. So let's pull out this iris.data, look at the shape of it, and pull out number of samples, number of features, and then print it out. So here, in this example data set, we have 150 samples, so 150 different flowers, and we have those 4 different features we talked about, the length of the petals, the length of the sepals, etc. And if we print the first example, iris.data 0, we see that it's just a few numbers measured in centimeters, which measure the attributes of the flowers. So again, if we look at the data and the target, the data is the number of samples by number of features. The target is just a list of the true identified classes of each object. So it's a length 150 array. And we can actually print that and see, yeah, we have a bunch of zeros, a bunch of ones, a bunch of twos. So these integer indices identify what the label of each iris is. And if we want to know what these labels correspond to, this is something that's just here for convenience. It tells us that it's the Setosa, versicolor, and the Virginica species. Okay, so this is our data. When you think Scikit-Learn data, think an array with number of samples by number of features, so a 2D array, and then a 1D array of labels. Those are the important aspects. So now, sometimes it's useful to visualize the data, especially when we have a small number of dimensions like this. You don't want to start blindly applying learning algorithms before you know what's in your data set. So that's why we started with Matplotlib a little bit earlier, to emphasize that. So if we take the x-index, these will range from 0 to 3, and we scatter plot the one dimension versus the other dimension. with the color being the target value, then we can see what the data look like. And it's kind of scattered around and mixed like that. As a quick exercise right here, if you have this up right here, I want you to try a few versions of this plot where you change the x-index and the y-index, and just see if you can find a projection of this data that where the samples are more clearly delineated than this one. Here the red and the green are kind of mixed together. It'd be hard to tell them apart based on just these features. But change these numbers from between 0 and 3 just for a moment here and see if you can come up with a better projection. Yeah.
How is this data actually classified? The data set, how did they figure out which one?
Oh, you mean the true classifications? Yeah, so he asked how the true classifications were done here, and those came from an expert in the field. There's a biologist who went out and measured these and said, I know what the species are.
Is it circular, like is the data we're using, was it used as part of the true classification?
He asked if the data we're using was part of the true classification, and I'm sure it entered into it, but there's some expert knowledge that goes into the classification. So the idea here is trying to figure out if we can do that classification without the expert knowledge, without a biology PhD standing next to us telling us what the species is. Can we do it from just this data, and can we do it classified in an automated way? Yeah.
Can we mention what we're doing when we're varying the x and y index from 0 to 2?
Yeah, so she had a question about what we're doing when we're changing the x and y index. So we're looking at, this is 4-dimensional data, right? And because we can't visualize 4-dimensional plots, we're just looking at 2 of the axes at a time. So for example, here we're looking at sepal width versus sepal length. And if we change this, so if I change the y-index to 2, then we'll see in the plot labels that we have petal length versus sepal length. And that actually does a little bit better of separating the data out. Did anybody find a really good combination? 2 and 3? Let's take a look at that. So x-axis index 2, y-index 3. We do that? Oh, that looks pretty good, yeah. So if we plot the petal width versus the petal length, then apparently that does a good job. That's a pretty good way of separating the data out. So this is something, what we've done right here, this quick exercise is something called feature selection. And you can do that manually, right? You can just kind of click on the data and do trial and error until you find features that seem to work really well. But there are also automated algorithms to do feature selection, and we'll cover some similar algorithms later in the tutorial. This is just to give you an idea of what it's like working with data. If you have 4-dimensional data, you can only visualize 2, maybe 3 dimensions at a time. If you go up to something with 1,000 or 2,000 dimensions, it gets much, much harder. And it would take a long time to try all the combinations of 2 variables. Okay, so any questions at this point? Yeah.
Real quick to get target. There are 150 samples altogether, and the target puts a descriptor on those samples?
Right, yeah, 150 samples altogether, and the target labels these as members of one of 3 species. Yeah. Okay. So just to show you real quick, we have a lot of other data that's available in Scikit-Learn, and if you go on the documentation online, there are tons of examples with different data sets. But as a broad overview, we have 3 types of data. We have packaged data, which this is data that's packaged with Scikit-Learn. So when you install Scikit-Learn, you already have it on your hard drive. And that's in this datasets.load _ and the dataset name. We have data that exists out there on the web, and we've built wrappers that actually download it over the web for you. And those are in the datasets.fetch methods. And then we also have data sets that can be generated on the fly based on a random seed, and these are in the datasets.make methods. So if you're ever curious what sort of data sets they are, you can do from Scikit-Learn import data sets and just write in IPython datasets.fetch, start that out and press tab, and it gives you, let me scroll up so we can see this better. Fetch underscore, press tab, and then you can see all these different data sets that can be fetched. Or for example, the data sets that can be loaded. We have all these different data sets that are included with Scikit-Learn, that are packaged with Scikit-Learn. So it can be fun to explore, and you can see the documentation for more examples of that. And just as a note, the data sets that are fetched, the ones that are downloaded from online, we don't want people to have to download those every time, so they're actually cached locally on your disk. And the place that they're cached can be found by importing getDataHome and then running the function, and it returns a directory. So for me, it's in my home directory right here, /Scikit-Learn data. And there's some documentation online about how you can change that default if you want it stored in a different place. So let's take a look at what I have there right now. So I have a couple data sets in my data directory right now. So
what about the generated? You said something about generated, there were 3.
yeah, there's the generated data. So if we do datasets.make underscore, these are just different types of data that can be generated from scratch. So they're generated from some sort of model. And we'll actually see an example of one of those down below. Yeah.
I called one of the make functions, and I don't get back a bunch object. And my first question is, how do I get a bunch object? Am I assuming I got a tuple instead? Is that
Yeah, so
the array of data and then the array of target?
yeah, if you get, I think for the make functions, you're generally getting back a tuple, and that would be the data array, the target array. Yeah, that's one of the things that's a little bit heterogeneous right now. Yeah.
You might get into this a little later, but can you talk a bit about choosing features? You know, if we're starting with our own data set, we might have thousands of features. I mean, how do we?
Yeah, you're anticipating some of the next section, so we'll get into that. He was asking about choosing features. If you have your own data set, how do you decide what goes into the learning algorithm? And we'll address that in I think, the next notebook. Okay. Yeah.
Getting back to that target thing, what if your data array is time series? Like you have a number of variables in the X columns, and you have timestamps, 1,000. What would the target vector look like?
Yeah, so this is another feature selection question. He was asking about time series data, what the target would be for that. And maybe, do you mind if we return to that on the next slide when we talk, or the next notebook when we talk about feature selection? That's an interesting question, though. We'll definitely get to that. So I want to show a little more complicated data set. This last one we were looking at 150 by 4 features, 150 samples by 4 features. And this one is a little bit bigger. We saw the digits data before. But if we do use the load digits function, call that and put it into an object named digits, and then look at the keys, what we have are the images, the data, the target names, the description, and the target. So again, the data is number of samples by number of features. And if we print that, we see that we have 1,797 samples, so 1,797 different digits with 64 features. And if we print that data, it looks like this. And this is a little bit unintuitive. So for that reason, the data is repackaged in here as well as 8 by 8 images. And we can see that the images and the data are just the same array. If we reshape the images to be just 1797 by 64 and compare it to the data, we see that they're all true. Yeah.
So if these digit images were different sizes, would we have to just make them all 8 by 8?
Yeah, that's another feature selection thing. And if I pull up this figure, it'll make it a little bit more clear. This figure will plot a bunch of the data. And we can see that what the data is we're looking at here. We're looking at nice 8 by 8 images that are zoomed in right around the digit images. And he asked an interesting question. He said, so what if these digits are out in the wild? What if you just have a picture of a text document? how do you figure out where that box is? This is another feature selection thing. You essentially need to, in order to run these machine learning algorithms, you need each feature to really be measuring the same thing. In the iris case, the first feature was the petal length. In the digit case here, the first feature is that upper left pixel in this nice normalized image. If you had a picture of someone's head that was 800 by 1,000 pixels and another picture of someone's head that was 2,000 by 4,000 pixels, you can't compare those in a meaningful way with a learning algorithm in the way that we're talking about it. So you need some sort of feature selection thing. You need something that says, this is what a digit looks like. I'm going to zoom in on the page and renormalize that. That's a little bit more advanced topic. We're not going to cover that much in this tutorial, but there are examples online that you can see for how to do that, how to do this pre-processing step to kind of normalize your data and get it down to the same size. And maybe Olivier or Gaël can comment on that a little bit later. But yeah, so it's an important aspect of it, and that's something that there are good methods out there. A lot of them involve things like sliding filters across and looking for different aspects that are interesting. But for the machine learning that we're doing, we need all the features to be normal and regular, so each feature measures the same thing. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, so these are the data we're looking at. Like I said, each one has 64 features, and we have 1,800 of these. And you can see that some of them are pretty easy to recognize. This is a 0 right here. Some of them are harder. The fact that this is a 9, I don't know if I'd get that by myself. Here's another 9. I think that was the same person. Oh, really? The individual numbers are flipped? Okay, so there's settings in the Matplotlib RC file that control where the origin is on the imshow command, and you must have set something different than default on that. So one way you could do that is if you go in imshow here and say origin equals lower, or actually, sorry, origin equals upper, that'll switch that default. Where'd it go? There we are. So hopefully that'll work for you. Origin equals upper. So that should be the default setting, but you might have something changed there. So we'll return to the digits data later. We'll do some learning exercises on them, and it's a really interesting data set to work with. But really quick, there was a question about the generated data. Here's an example of the generated data set. This is one that's known as the S-curve, and it's a three-dimensional data set that is a two-dimensional manifold embedded in 3D. And if we call, like Brian said, it's a tuple that's returned, the data and the colors equals make S-curve. Here, data is the number of features, or number of samples by number of features, and the colors is the label. And we can use our 3D toolkit to plot this, and this is what it looks like here. So like I said, it's three-dimensional points, and it's kind of it's a two-dimensional manifold that curves through space and is embedded in that 3 dimensions. And this is an interesting toy data set for problems like manifold learning, which we'll see later. It's their nonlinear dimensionality reduction methods. And yeah. Yeah, he was asking if there's an easy way to pop up the plot in the Matplotlib window so you can move it around. There's not really an easy way. What you can do is restart your kernel and then add a cell here that says just PyLab instead of PyLab inline. And then you can plot that up and it'll pop up. And for some reason it didn't show on mine. I didn't import? Oh yeah. Data's not fine. That was a bad one. There's our data. Okay, now it should work. Yeah, so then you can pop it up. And this is just a IPython can only use one backend at a time, and this is a different backend than the inline backend. So I don't know if Brian has a comment of a better way to do that. Not at this point. Okay. So that's how you can kind of hack around it right now. But I'm gonna restart the kernel again and go back to Pylab inline mode. So as a quick exercise, just to get you guys working with data, what I'd like you to do right now is look at this fetch Olivetti faces data set. So you can kind of follow the example from the image processing one again that we did just above, where you fetch the data set, look at the keys to see what sort of objects are in there, kind of explore the shapes of the data, and then use a script kind of like the one above, the for loop with imshow to plot some of the images of the faces. And this is just to give you some experience in kind of working with this data yourself and seeing what it looks like. And while you're doing that, it'll take about 5 or 10 minutes to do that. While you're doing that, Gaël and Olivier and I will walk around and answer any questions that you might have. So take a few minutes for that right now.